So this is going to be the second video in this series for using ArcGIS Pro in forestry. We're picking up right where we left off with our last video, where we already have our property boundary for our landowner established. We have aerial imagery already imported. We didn't necessarily need to do that step, but it was something that I just wanted to be able to show everybody. And then we also have our GPS line that we've added in here from, our theoretical field trip where we went out and GPS the stream. So what we're going to be doing in this video is looking at our attribute table, which is where we keep everything organized in terms of data that's specific for a shapefile. For instance, landowner name, any sort of attribute that we may consider with like a line feature, like whether it's a road or a stream or a logging trail, anything like that. Acres is another thing that we'll have in our attribute table. So we'll work on adding that. And then we'll also work on starting to digitize certain features like this field or this big pine stand in the southern area. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to go to our property line feature. And to get to our attribute table, we'll right click on it and then go up to attribute table and open that up. And then we can see here, and you can make this window a little bit bigger, but we can see here that there's a lot of data in here that we don't necessarily need, and some of it's useful. There's landowner name in here. Typically, I don't worry about all this stuff because we know the landowner name and we can enter that in a different area. But to get rid of all this excess data that we don't necessarily need, you can right click on that shapefile again, go up to data design, then fields. And field is our column headers. So if you've ever used a data manager like Microsoft Excel, you know that there's columns and rows, and the columns typically are what the data is. So we can see here we have all this data that we don't necessarily need, and you might think that you want GIS acres, but we'll go ahead and add that again later and have it to where we can calculate it on our own. That way we know that it's right after we do any sort of edits, and then we're not relying on somebody else having calculated data for us and then questioning if that's right or wrong. So one thing that you'll notice here is that in this field name, you can see some of these objects are shaded out a little bit, and these are a little bit more vibrant. They're white, where this is gray. If we select on this left side where we have all these gray boxes, we can select certain ones. And if we select the top one that's white, scroll all the way down to the bottom one, select it that's white, and we hold Shift and click that one, then that will highlight all of the ones in between the first one and the last one that we clicked. So none of these we want. So we'll go ahead and right click on these left bars anywhere, and then we'll go delete. And so it doesn't automatically delete them. You have to actually save the change. So you can see that it's green on this. These little boxes have turned from gray to green, which means that it's a valid request that you've made of the attribute table. And then we'll go up here to save. And once that runs, you can see that we've gotten rid of all the excess ones. So I don't necessarily like any of these. They're the defaults, but they have to be there for the shapefile to work correctly. So we can actually turn all these off and make them invisible. That way, when we go back to our attribute table, we're not left with things that might be confusing. So we do want a few things here. So if we click down here to add a new field, we can do this, and we'll name the field name landowner. And then the field name is the name that ArcGIS Pro understands how to read. Everything's run with code, and so there can't be spaces within code. So if I were to, instead of typing landowner, type landowner name, it would have to have an underscore or just, something like that. But in this alias, that's what it wants to show you. So here you can just type in landowner name with a space, and it will accept it. But you'll notice that in here, you can't ever enter a space. It just won't allow you to. And so the last thing that we need to worry about when making a new field is this data type. So this is currently set to long. So the ones that you need to worry about are short and long are just integers. They're rounded to the nearest whole number. So that's useful, but if you do acres, you typically don't want acres rounded to the nearest whole number. Or if you do, you can just go ahead and round it in your head. It's not that hard. But you don't want a 12.3 acre stand to be rounded to 12 necessarily. I like having those digits, or at least the ability to have those digits. So if you want digits, you go down to float. But in this case, the landowner name is just text, so we'll go down here to text. And then once that's added, that's our going to be our new attribute for our landowner name. So we'll add one more, and this one will be acres. And then we don't have to add an alias if it's something that we want. So ArcGIS Pro, if it's not given an alias, it will just display you the field name. And so I just like things to be, look a little bit neater and nicer. So I have that alias having a space with landowner name, but for acres, there's not a need for a space. So we'll change the data type to float, and that will give us our decimal places. And then we can see all these have green check boxes or green boxes instead of gray, so we're good. We go up here to save, and then everything's good. So then we can go back to our tab right here, which is our attribute table. We can actually just X out of this field tab. And then we see we have our landowner name and our acres. So what we'll do for landowner name is we just type the landowner name. So I'm just going to call this Smith. And you can have whatever you're working on. If you're working on a make-believe one, you can call it Smith. If you're actually working with a client, you can use his or her names. And then acres is a little bit more complicated. So we'll right-click on the very top where it says acres. And then we'll go to calculate geometry. And that will pop up this window. So you can see here, for some reason, I have an edit. I guess that's where I typed in my landowner name. So we always, if we see this, we want to save it. So we know our input features is property line. That's where we're working at. Our field is called acres. We'll use this drop-down box to use area. And then that will open up this other drop-down box, which is the area unit. So we want to use US survey acres. And then our coordinate system, you can click the down arrow, and then you can just select current map. So your coordinate system doesn't actually matter that much, but because it should default to something that works correct based on the map that you're using. So that's a little bit deeper conversation than we need to get in here. But if you're in North Carolina, specifically Piedmont, North Carolina, like I am, NAD 1983, State Plane, North Carolina, FIPS 3200 is what you typically want. So we'll click OK. And just for reference, that coordinate system is being pulled from the NC1 map. That's what NC1 map uses. So that's why that works well for us. That's why we're able to use the current map. So we can see that this landowner is 214 acres. So all that's good. So we can just close this out. And now it's time to start digitizing. So we'll start by digitizing this creek. So we see that we have this creek, and we can go ahead and change that symbology so that it's easier to see. And this is something that we went over in the last video, but you just go over here to your contents pane, and then you can see the actual symbology, the example symbology that's given. Click on this. And these are all the default ones, but if I want to make a custom one, I click on properties, appearance. We'll just do yellow. Yellow is always easy to see. And there we go. So now that we can see what we've GPSed, we know that, this is the main creek, Tick Creek. There's a little spur right here that we GPSed, and there's this little section. So the first thing that you need to ask is, what am I doing for this landowner? If I'm just cutting pine, then this doesn't actually matter. But for this scenario, we're going to say that we're going to cut, everything that's viable to cut. So we do need to GPS this, or we do need to digitize this stream so that we can put it on a map and that we can use it for calculating acres. So we have to set up a stream layer. So you can see here on the left side that we have our GPS line, our property line, parcels, aerial imagery, but we don't have a stream layer yet. So we'll go over to catalog. So let me get rid of some of these. So if you open up your catalog pane, remember that you can type that up in this search bar up here if you don't have it, and then you can put it on the right side of your screen, or that's just how I like it. So if you go up to your catalog pane, if you go to project and go down to folders, you click the little arrow to open it up, and then you can see that you have a folder for this for your individual ArcPro project that you've opened up. And then you can see this weird little symbol with the house, and it says, the name of your file .gbd. So that GBD stands for geodatabase, which is where all of your shape files and stuff are held. So if we open that up, we can see that we have our property line. So that's the one that we specifically added, or we created when we exported our property line for our property owner out of the NC1 map county data. So what we can do is we can right click on the geodatabase. We'll go up to new and then feature class. So feature class is what ArcGIS Pro uses as a shapefile. It's actually not a shapefile until you export it as one, but it's essentially the same thing. It functions the same way. So we'll name this, just name it SMZ, Streamside Management Zone. Again, we don't have a space, so we don't need an alias. It is going to be a polygon. That's an important thing to remember. If you're using a polygon, a line, or a point, if you're doing a road, you might want a line. If you're putting in a point for any sort of special feature, a deer stand that you found, an old well that you want to make sure that your logger's aware of, or something like that, then you might want a point. But in our case, for this SMZ, we want a polygon. And we'll go down here and click next. And so you can see this is a little bit familiar. These are our fields. So these are the things that are going to be in our attribute table. So again, object ID and shape are default. But two that we want to add are, again, landowner name. I'm just going to do landowner. And then we want that to be text. And then we'll add another one for acres. And we want this one to be float. And then after you've done that, and if you want to add more for whatever reason, you can. These are just the ones that I want to add for this project. So we'll go ahead, and we don't have to worry about these next ones, but we'll go ahead and click finish. And then we'll have our SMZ. So before we do anything, I like to go ahead and change the symbology for our SMZ. So I'll change my color to, I guess we'll do blue, but I like to do a light blue. Light colors just show up a little bit better. And we'll change it for the color, which is the interior, and then the outside color as well. And then I don't like things to be solid like this, but I also don't like them just to have a perimeter unless it's the property boundary. If you do that, then sometimes your perimeters are overlapping. For instance, your pine perimeter is overlapping with your hardwood perimeter, and if you have sections that are small and within a existing boundary, for instance, I know this is a logging deck, but if we wanted to define that as an open area instead of just lumping it into the pine stand, then our pine stand boundary might overlap with this open area shapefile. And I can show you that later if that doesn't make any sense. But the way to get around that is to put hash lines through things. So if we go up here to this little symbol right here that has the layers on it, we can go to our no. So if we go over here to our layers, which has the three little squares overlapping, and then we go over here, we can see that there's a solid stroke and a solid fill. So if we go down to solid fill and we use the little drop down, we can do this hatched fill. And that will give us these hatched lines for us. And one thing that I like to do is when you go down to pattern, you can see this separation is 0.4. I like to make this really big, like 20. And that way, there's still hash lines going through the shapefile, and I can see, hey, that area is part of this SMZ, but they're not so close together that they block out being able to see what's underneath. And honestly, I'll probably make this even bigger than that. Maybe let's do 26. And you can see a preview down here about what this looks like. So now we have this created. Everything's good. And so we have to draw it. So in order to draw, we'll go ahead and make this a little bit smaller so that we can do this. We'll go up here to our Edit tab on our top ribbon, and then we go to Create. And so when we click Create, it opens up this Create feature pane, and we can see everything that we have that we're able to edit. So we see our GPS line, our property line, and our SMZ. So We don't see the aerial imagery because we obviously can't edit that. And then we don't see the files that we've turned off, which is this Chatham parcel. So that's all the parcels for Chatham County. So if we click on our SMZ here, and it's important to remember that just because you have a layer selected in this contents pane does not mean that it's selected in here. So once we select this, then we see this little box open up in the bottom. And really the two things that we need to worry about in this box are this line tool and this tool called trace. So the line is just that. It's where we can draw lines as we click. Our trace tool actually will follow along an existing line. So each one of these, each shapefile that we have has these things called vertexes. So every time there's a corner, you can see a corner right here, there's that vertex. And so the trace feature will drop a point at every single vertex. And that way it follows along perfectly. But this tool's a little bit difficult to use using that trace feature. It's super useful. It's something that you really need to learn how to use, but it can be a little bit difficult. So what I'll do is I understand that I want to trace this. So I'll start by selecting my trace tool, going right here at the corner and following right along. And you can see that if you click again, it'll pause it. And then when you click another time, it'll start it again. But you can see that dashed line is where we've done. And you can also tell because we put that hash line through there, the area that's covered. So one thing that you can do is you can use your arrow keys to move. And that's the simplest way. But I'm pretty good at scrolling in and out to be able to move around the map. So if you scroll out in the bottom right corner, and then you can scroll in on the top left corner, you can move that direction. And don't be scared to zoom in as far as you can. So see this property corner? See, I GPSed it. You know, I fake GPSed it through this property line, but I don't care about that because that's not on my landowner's property. So I'll follow a different GPS or a different line feature, which is my property line. So we'll keep doing this. Pausing whenever we need to move our map. I'm going to here, and you can see this is where we have an issue. So I want to take this all the way to the boundary of my map so that it looks neat. But I did not GPS it all the way over there. So I can click here, then I can change this tool and then click. And then when I'm done and I'm happy with the way this looks, I just double click and then I've created that feature. And so then we have another one over here, and this SMZ goes through this section of woods, and you can kind of see where the water goes through this field. And again, this is not a property that I've actually been on, so this might not actually exist. I was just making these based off of a topographic map. But I'll go ahead and make this again. Get right on this field edge, follow it along until I get to my GPS line, switch to my trace tool, click. Follow it right along until I'm done. And one thing to note is that you can't click on your to continue. See, I need to continue this to follow it along to my last vertice. You can't click on the last vertice. You need to click just a little bit further along. And then you follow along. And when you get to your last one, double click, and there you go. So now that we have that done as our SMZ file, as our polygon shape file, we can actually get rid of the GPS line. So we can just turn that off and see how this is selected with that bright blue line around it. Might be a little bit hard to see, but it is. We go up here and we click clear, and then we've gotten rid of that. So now we can see that we have our GPS stream marked on the map with a polygon. And having that polygon will allow us to calculate acres. So just to reiterate how to do that again before we are finished with this lesson. If we right click, oops. So this is just asking me if I want to commit to the symbology formatting that I did. So yes. So if we go over here and we right click and we go up to our attribute table, we can see we actually have two different areas. So let's fix that real quick. If we X out of here, I don't want these to be two separate SMZs. They're the same SMZ in my mind. They, you know, and this is a matter of opinion, I guess, but to me, they function the same way. That's the area that I cannot harvest in, or I can at least have limited harvest in for this landowner. And I might even want to get rid of this section in the future just because that's just a little bit of timber over there, and I might not want to cut it, and the landowner might not want me to because it's next to the road, and we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But if I want to merge these, then I can click on the select tool up here, select this one, hold the shift button on your keyboard, click this one, and then I can go up here to my tools. So my tools are all the things, tools for lack of a better word, that I can do to shape files. All the things that I can use to manipulate a shape file. I can physically move them on the map. I would never recommend doing this. I can edit vertices, reshape stuff, merge, and we'll get into what all these are, and we'll create examples where we need to use all these. But the first one we'll use is this merge tool. So if we click on it, and now we'll open up this pane in our right-hand window, and you can see that we have these two shape files right here. I'll highlight them for us, and we want them to be the same. So we'll just go ahead and click merge, and once that's done running, we'll click clear. And now when we select them, they select as one unit, even though they're separate. And that's how this property line works as well. You can see that there's a little bit of timber over here on the right side of the road, but they're acting as one unit because the landowner owns them both. So if we click clear again, go over here to SMZ, right click on it, go up to attribute. So we're going to fix this stuff. So our landowner again is Smith. And our acres, we don't have an acres. So we're going to right click, go to calculate geometry. See, we have pending edits. That's from where we merged everything and we didn't save. So one good thing about ArcGIS Pro is it's constantly asking you if you want to save your edits, which is something that I don't remember ArcGIS, the old version of ArcGIS, using. So our property is going to be area. That will open this area unit pane. Go down to US survey acres. And our coordinate system is just going to be our current map. We'll verify that that's good with what we want. Click OK. And then our SMZ is 12.2 acres. So, and if we ever have a situation where we want to change the SMZ, say later on down the road we want to get rid of this dog leg over here because we don't want to treat that as a SMZ, we don't want that to be extra confusion on our map, we can delete that section, but we have to recalculate acres. Nothing is automatically calculated for us, which is kind of a downside, but it's one of those things where we have to remember that this is not set up for foresters. This ArcGIS Pro was not built with the intention of it being used for foresters. It was just a generic mapping software, or it is a generic mapping software and a spatial data analysis software. So on the next video, we'll do some more digitizing. Hopefully that'll go pretty quick since we've gone over most of it in this video. And I will talk to you then. Thank you very much.